Good afternoon. My name is Maria Fay, and I am a project assistant at the Public Policy Institute of California. Thank you for tuning in to our program today featuring the findings of a new PPIC report, the impact of COVID-19 on science education. I'd like to thank the National Science Foundation under grant number 2128789 for their support of this research and today's event. Any opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation. For today's program, I will present the key findings from the report and then invite my co-author and colleague, Nhu Gao, to moderate a discussion with a panel of experts. If you are interested in learning more, the report, policy brief, technical appendices, as well as the slides from today's presentation are available on our website at ppic.org. A couple of housekeeping items before we start today's program. As a reminder, PPIC is a public charity and does not take or support positions on any ballot measures or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. And at the end of today's program, we have set aside some time to answer audience questions. If you have a question for our panelists, please send an email to the address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. We would appreciate you including your name and organization along with your question. And with that, I will begin my presentation. I'm presenting findings from our new report written by Nhu Gao, Kathy Durana, and myself on how COVID-19 has impacted science education in California schools, grades K through 12. California's K through 12 schools need to invest in science education. Science knowledge and the ability to think scientifically are essential for the future STEM workforce and for democracy. High-quality science education provides necessary skills such as communication, collaboration, inquiry, problem solving, and flexibility. If individuals have an understanding of science and engineering, they are better equipped to make informed decisions ranging from their own health to public policy that affect their communities. The United States lags behind other developed countries in science education, and within the United States, California is near the bottom on the National Assessment of Education Progress in Science. In 2015, average test scores in California were significantly below the national average, and only 24% of 4th and 8th graders were proficient, a proficiency rate that has not changed for many years. California also has the largest achievement gaps among student groups defined by race, ethnicity, and family income. Students of color and students experiencing poverty are less likely to receive a high-quality science education throughout K through 16. The next generation science standards were designed to improve science education through three-dimensional learning, combining cross-cutting concepts, science and engineering practices, and disciplinary core ideas. In 2013, California adopted Ngss, but according to data from 2019 to 20, implementation has been uneven across districts and grade levels. More districts are further along in the implementation process in grades K through 8 than in high school. This discrepancy is magnified in rural districts. High needs districts were more likely to be further along in the implementation process in elementary grades than low needs districts. COVID-19 and the abrupt switch to distance learning disrupted the implementation of Ngss. The focus of our study was to see how COVID-19 impacted science education, and more specifically, the implementation of Ngss. We were interested in district plans for supporting science education upon the return to in-person learning. We also explored ways in which policymakers could better support a more equitable science education moving forward. The data sources for this study included a survey of school districts conducted in the fall of 2021. 213 districts responded, and they represent 50% of the K-12 population in California. We did not find any difference in factors that typically predict student learning. We conducted over 40 semi-structured interviews with educational partners. This includes participants at the district, county, and state level. We looked at the local control and accountability plans from 2021 to 24 to see how money was being allocated towards supporting science education. We also looked at school accountability report cards from 2019 to 20 to see if districts were using NGSS-aligned textbooks. In our report, we define the equity factors as follows. High-need districts are those with at least 55% of their students designated as high need. High-poverty districts are those with at least 75% of students designated as low income. High Black and Latino districts are those with at least 75% of students identified as Black or Latino. In this presentation, we are focusing on overall findings, but you can refer to the report for a more detailed breakdown of the data. According to our survey results, science became a lower priority in most districts during the 2020-21 year, although rural districts fared a little better. When looking at all districts, 62% reported a lower priority for science, 37% reported the same level of priority, and only 1% a higher priority. In comparison, in rural districts, 40% reported lower priority, 47% at the same level, and 13% reported having a higher level of priority for science. In our interviews, some of the rural districts pointed to their strong relationship with community organizations and businesses related to the agricultural industry and their robust career pathway programs as reasons behind their ability to continue to prioritize science education during distance learning. Prior to the pandemic, about 43% of districts had not adopted NGSS-aligned instructional materials for K-8, and 64% hadn't for high school. Of these districts, more than 60% indicated that their textbook selection process was delayed due to COVID-19. That said, urban districts reported a lower rate of disruption, 33% in high school compared to 63% in all districts. As you can see from this graph, 74% of middle schools and 75% of high schools delayed the process of aligning their science courses with California NGSS. The abrupt change to distance learning due to COVID-19 required a major shift in instruction. However, support for science education was limited. According to our survey, districts provided support for science education in the following areas. 60% provided supplemental instructional materials. 43% provided summer science programs. 40% addressed social emotional learning in order to better support science education. 28% assessed student learning, and this is compared to 89% for math and English language arts. And only 25% provided small group instruction, compared to 2/3 of districts offering small group instruction for math and English language arts. According to our interviews, although county offices of education were prepared to provide science-related assistance, they saw a decline in requests for the areas of science professional learning and technical assistance. In terms of recovery plans, we found that most districts are not prioritizing science education. Only 27% of respondents indicated that science is a high priority, compared to more than 80% for math and English language arts. Urban districts were even less likely to report science as a high priority, approximately 15%. According to districts' local control and accountability plans for 2021 to 24 school years, 86% mention science or California NGSS. However, most do not mention specific programs or indicate dedicated resources. Our interviews suggest that local districts continue to prioritize math and English language arts over science because the state does not require districts to address science education in local control and accountability plans. Based on our findings, we recommend the following strategies for California to better support equitable science education. 1, the state should include science in its district accountability requirements, such as including science in its guidelines for spending stimulus money, requiring districts to include a line item for science education in local control and accountability plans, adding science indicators in the state's accountability measure, and adding performance data for the California Science Test to the California School Dashboard. 2, the state should provide dedicated funding for professional learning opportunities. In order for teachers to effectively implement the new standards, they need adequate professional training, which they were not receiving prior to the pandemic. The state has allocated $1.25 billion towards Common Core implementation. It could similarly support California NGSS implementation. 3, the state should provide more evidence-based strategies to support science learning recovery. Currently, the state's elementary and secondary school emergency relief and expanded learning opportunities grant guidance don't include science. Districts need more evidence-based strategies from the state to guide their recovery efforts. 4, science educators, parents and caregivers, students, community-based organizations, and research committees need to work together to stress the importance of science education. By creating a statewide coalition, they can more effectively raise awareness and a sense of urgency with policymakers to provide much needed support for science education. That ends the findings portion of today's event. Now let's move on to the panel of experts to further discuss how COVID-19 has affected science education. If you have a question for our panelists, please send it to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. We would appreciate it if you include your name and organization along with your question. I'd like now to welcome my colleague and senior PPIC fellow, New Gao, to join me.
Thank you, Maria, for the excellent presentation. Now, please join me in welcoming our panelists. Their bios can be found on the PPIC event page. So in the interest of time, we'll only do brief introductions. First, I'd like to welcome Jennifer Bentley. She is the Education Administrator in the Curriculum Frameworks and Instructional Resources Division at the California Department of Education. Our second panelist is Martin Macias. He is the Superintendent of the Golden Plains Unified School District. Our third panelist is Heidi Schreingruber. She is the Director of the Board on Science Education and the National Academy of Sciences. Welcome. In Maria's presentation, she showed that science has been widely put on the back burner during COVID-19, and this happened to most districts, including low-income districts, as well as districts with high shares of Black Latino students. What factors contributed to the deprioritization of science education?
I can get us started if that's okay in you. So I think that deprioritization was already an issue before COVID-19 started with science due to a lack of training for elementary teachers and prioritization at the school level and the district level. However, uncertainty around teaching distance learning in general led to a lot of teachers, especially elementary teachers, to pull back on content areas where they felt the least confident, and that included science. So just having to deal with distance learning and that being a new thing made a lot of teachers want to focus on the content areas where they felt the most comfortable.
And if I can add, at the local level, at the district level, in our case, that spring, early in that spring, we had a team of K-8 teachers that went to a training on the toolkit for the adoption. So we began the work. They spent a week learning how to be able to look at data to reflect the need for our school district. And then COVID hit, right? So it kind of shifted the priority and put what I thought was going to be the adoption of the science curriculum on hold. But as soon as we shifted it into distance learning, the committee came back and said, okay, I know we have all these things going on. We need to go back and continue where we left off, because this gives us time to be able to work from home, thinking about the driving and that kind of logistical things, that we can spend time, and even in the evenings, which is what happened, and really dig deep into the actual curriculum itself. And for us, it was just a matter of processing time to be able to unpack not only the different vendors that we were looking at, but then for them to be able to ask those hard questions of the vendors, which is what they did. Ask those hard questions about primarily about literacy, because our demographics, we have 88% of our students fall under the ever English language learner umbrella. So 97% low socioeconomic disadvantage, so 98% Latino. So our demographics and their insights into the actual the science was very intentional, as they actually interviewed these 3 vendors that they were looking at, see who was going to be the best fit. For us, it was just put things on hold for a little bit. And I'll kind of stop there, because I think in the other questions I'll be able to expand a bit more.
And I'll just give a quick national, some of what the report and what Jennifer and Martine just commented on reflect nationally what we see as kind of a lack of recognition of science as a core subject, in the same way that we see ELA and math as core subjects. We don't always perceive science in the same way, and you can see that reflected in lack of science sometimes in accountability systems. And so we've really been saying we need to elevate that because of the need for science literacy, and that all students need to have access to the high-level jobs across the STEM fields for which science is fundamental. So that's one piece. And to echo something Jennifer said, we've also seen the push in the new standards is very much to doing science, so really engaging kids. And when the shift went to virtual, even teachers who had really gotten on board with this new approach, there was sort of a sense of, wait a minute, I've figured out how to do this in my classroom with the kids, and how do I make a shift to virtual and do it in a meaningful way? And I think those 2 things combined are part of what made it difficult in some places to continue science at the same level.
Thank you, Jennifer and Martine, and also Heidi, for sharing the state, local, and also national perspectives. The second question is, did you see any silver linings that came out of the pandemic?
I think that one of the biggest ones that I've heard from teachers in the field is that they actually did realize that you can do quality NGSS learning online, and that you can do it with a limited amount of supplies. So teachers who are amazing to begin with have been able to figure out how to have high quality instructional cycles at home with limited materials. And I think that's something that they can take back to the classroom and realize that, oh, okay, well, even if I don't have a ton of money for extra materials to do these inquiries, I can still have my kids doing wonderful science.
I will say, I'll just jump in really quickly. One thing I was really struck by in the report, the trends in California, was the success in the rural districts with maintaining the emphasis on science. And that part of what they reported were those deep partnerships with business and community, other community partners. And I actually think that's a wonderful lesson learned for other districts to think about in terms of how do we expand science or leverage our partners for science.
And if I can add, in our case, we were for a couple of years now, we had been doing some hands-on learning thematic approach to our 6 to 8 week units of study that were taking place, especially in the K-5 area. So as we went into this new era of distance learning, right, our teachers came back for a week right after the pandemic, and for a week they restructured and readjusted their kits that they were sending home, the homework. Packets. And most of it was those hands-on activities, and through the Chromebooks they were able to see what students were doing at the other end. In some cases, take pictures or video as a validation that hands-on projects can still be done at home. But it had a pivot. And they had to come back as teams and look at what was working and then adjust.
So now let's switch gears a little bit by looking ahead. As schools recover from the pandemic, how can we prioritize science education? In other words, what does prioritization look like at the national level and the state level, and also at the local level?
So at the state level, there's 3 pieces of legislation that have come out of the governor's budget that I just want to highlight really quickly. So the Learning Recovery and Emergency Block Grant, it's $7.9 billion for one-time funding for schools that can be used for increased instructional minutes, to help close those learning gaps that happened over the years of distance learning, additional instruction, academic services. So that's one. Another one is the Arts, Music, and Instructional Materials Block Grant. This is $3.6 billion of one-time funding. And this can be used for professional learning. This can be used for acquiring instructional materials, as well as a lot of other opportunities that schools can take advantage of. And my last highlight is there's an $85 million part of the budget to create pre-K through 12 educational resources to help implement California NGSS, as well as the new California math framework and the computer science standards. So the governor's budget has a lot of opportunities for schools and districts and county offices to take advantage of for science learning and science professional learning and science instructional materials. It would just be a matter of allocating those funds for science rather than English language or math, because they are very broad as to what the money can be spent on.
I guess from our end is the alignment of the state frameworks, the ELA, ELD framework, the ELD standards, right? And the mathematical practices, and looking at it, going back to just the ELA, ELD framework and how that rich language, whether in this case, informational text, right? Where the teachers can look at reading and literacy and writing in science. Whereas in the past, we used to see things in silos, right? You have your math time, you have your English time, you have your PE time, and so on. So one of the things that we're trying to do is look at the school day through the lens of reading and writing, as we look at this, especially the ELA standards in science, in math, and be able to really capitalize on that conversation. We have spent a lot of days time on literacy, the framework itself, to really be able to understand what should be happening at the TK level and at the high school level in electives. It doesn't go away. In the electives classes at the high school, AP classes, you're still having to be able to teach literacy.
Yeah.
In this case, as we look at emphasizing in science, especially with our population of students, 80% of the science language comes from Latin, right? So there's a lot of literacy that can, if the students have already the background, as they begin to do the work in science, they understand it already. So we just have to move them forward a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to build on that and elevate that point about I'll turn it around a little bit. I just think science is a phenomenal, rich, meaningful context for ELA and math. And we sometimes forget, we get stuck in these silos and forget that part of what we know underscores learning is kids being motivated because the learning is relevant and because they're engaged in it and they're pursuing things they're interested in. And so I just think starting to understand how we can leverage the context of science for the broad things that kids need to learn. I also would challenge us to think about, if we consider science a core subject, then what does that mean about how we're featuring it in an accountability system, how we're funding it, how we're providing learning opportunities for teachers. I mean, so to start thinking, if we change the frame and say science needs to be on par with ELA and math, what does that mean about the attention we give it in policy and in funding and in our decision making? We need better assessments, meaningful assessments. I also just wanted to call out teachers are so central to this, and in looking at what was happening before the pandemic with implementation of NGSS, we knew we needed more for teachers. So you need professional learning for elementary teachers that's focused on science. And then in the secondary level, I really think we need to attend to the teacher shortages, that particularly in the physical sciences. If we don't, we have to look at it nationally, but also at state level. That's a real pinch point for doing what we want to do in science.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We'll get the chance to talk about teachers or science teachers later on. But first, I'd like to follow up on the early grade science that all of you have mentioned. So based on the national survey conducted by Horizon Research, on average, K3 students spend 89 minutes a day on reading or language arts, 57 minutes a day on math, but only 18 minutes a day on science. So what can we do to increase science instructional minutes, especially in early grades?
I guess I can go back to some of the comments that both Jen and Heidi have said, right? If we go back to looking at science through the lens of being able to read and write, to unpack even the ELA standards with content now, it really helps our students be able to, in our case, those hands-on activities, manipulatives, to be able to be part of the learning versus the workbooks, right? Trying to stay away from worksheets and things like that. So if we have those kits where students are able to dive in and being able to articulate what they're learning, and that's the things that we've been seeing, this rich grade level content in science, in math, when students are exposed to that rich literacy through the lens of what they bring to our classrooms. And that's part of the challenge, right? That we have to be able to embrace science, yes, as a content, but there's the demands of being able to read and write at the same time, and the language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that science is extremely high interest, and we have data that shows that when you start science in elementary, students continue their interest on through secondary. I will say that California State does not have any mandated minutes of instruction time other than for physical education. So something that can be discussed is producing legislation that has minutes and what we need to spend on in the elementary classroom as far as time for each content area is concerned. But definitely want to echo my fellow panel members about how science really can be the driver behind literacy and math, even social science, and using those high interest topics to address standards in other content areas is really a great way for elementary students to start getting those high quality instructional minutes in science.
And we, in October of, it's now 2021, so it's been out for a while, we did a report on science and engineering in pre-K through 5th grade. And one of the things that committee called out was it would be useful to have like examples of schedules from elementary schools that show different uses of time, because it's sometimes hard when you're stuck in a particular way of thinking. But if you can see examples of places where people have done thoughtful integration or people adjusted schedules so that you did have more time for science exclusively. So that might be something at a state level that could be developed that are just, here's example schedules and here's what thoughtful integration looks like. So that same committee said, we want to integrate, but you don't want to do it in a way that assumes you're still going to get everything you need in each subject. You want to be really thoughtful and intentional about how you're doing that integration. So some models of what that looks like seem like they'd be very helpful to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing those thoughts. So now let's talk about NGSS, or the Next Generation Science Standards. So California adopted NGSS in 2013, and if implemented well, NGSS could support science teaching and learning in our schools. But as Maria's presentation has showed, COVID-19 pretty much eroded a lot of the progress districts made in NGSS implementation. So moving forward, what can we do to support NGSS implementation, and also what should we prioritize?
Well,
go ahead, Heidi.
Oh,
go ahead.
well, I was just going to jump in and say, I will say that I was struck by, even before NGSS, that implementation has not as far along in the high school. And so it does make me feel like there's some need to attend to that, like what's going on there and how, since there's a dedicated science course at that level, what can be done to sort of reinvigorate and even accelerate what was happening there for sure. And I think supporting teacher learning in the elementary grades for science is really critical. And I also just wanted to raise a question, which is getting underneath why, even before the pandemic, why implementation in low needs districts was farther behind. That's a good question to try to pursue now as you're trying to reinvigorate implementation.
Mm-hmm.
I would just echo that professional learning really, I think, is key for teachers. NGSS is complicated. there's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts, moving away from students will do to helping them with performance expectations. You have science and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts. So all of these things for teachers, if they don't know how to implement them and to integrate them into what they already have, it can seem kind of daunting and make teachers sort of want to put off implementing those the new standards in their classrooms, especially with elementary teachers who maybe feel already like their content knowledge in science might be really low. Professional learning for them is key to implementation in the classroom. And hopefully some of the money that the new budget has for professional learning can help school districts and school sites sort of get the professional learning ball rolling once again.
And at the local level, we actually, through the pandemic, we were able to adopt. So we have the materials in the school district, in the schools. And this past summer, the summer school, the emphasis was on unpacking some of that science curriculum just for the K-8s, right? Wanting from my end, it was to have teachers explore, be able to see what they felt comfortable with. And then as they came back for this school year, looking at the professional development days that we have allocated throughout the year to be able to spend on science. So we had the conversation with the vendor already. And then throughout the month, there was a lot of times that we have early release, bringing back at the grade level span, because we have 4 K-8s at the grade level span across the 4 school sites, be able to spend time at the grade span with teachers from other school sites, exploring, really looking at what they're doing that will capitalize and create the synergy that they need from within. We're rural, we cover 360 square miles. So to get someone to come in for an hour and a half or a half a day, it really makes it really challenging. But if we can bank on having the learning come from the classroom, even if the presenter is far away, and then with the support of the administration, the district office, the whatever barriers might come up, then we can somehow be able to adjust and be able to support at the classroom level. But we have adopted, and this year is to really bank on the implementation of our discovery program.
I got to say, I just want to say, I love that idea too of like building the teams within that are going to be supportive of each other and you know, of teachers, because that's to me the way you're going to keep it going, even in the face if there are additional challenges, you know, as you might get waves in the winter or something like that. You know, building that momentum internally feels like it's so important for sustaining it through those kinds of unanticipated, unexpected disruptions.
Thank you. And then, so next question, let's go beyond NGSS and then talk about science recovery in general. So moving forward, how can we support a more equitable science education? And also what should be the priorities to promote an equitable science education?
I'll give the national perspective that we've been kind of talking about from a couple of reports that we've done, which is really starting to get serious about thinking through opportunity gaps, not just focusing on achievement gaps. So really thinking about where are kids, maybe where their disparities maybe in both access and quality. So thinking about the quality of the learning experience, not just the quantity. And where do we see gaps? So starting to track data about, are some schools getting, you know, more funding than others, or are we seeing a distribution of teachers with strong backgrounds in science, an unequal distribution? So starting to really frame it around opportunity gaps and then using information about that to drive where you're investing and how you're making some decisions. So that's from a national and state level. But that shift in achievement gaps don't really tell you much until you understand what do they come from and start to work on those opportunity gaps.
I guess
go ahead. I think that the opportunity gap thing is key, and it's not necessarily lack of achievement; it's lack of opportunity to participate in science that we are seeing across the state. A lot of the lack of opportunity is at schools with lower socioeconomic status students and students of color. One of the things that was on the list of things to do for the State Board of Education before COVID was to talk about adding the California Science Test to the accountability dashboard. COVID sort of limited our ability to do that because the CAS test was not given all those years. So the amount of data we have is a lot smaller than it might have been. But I know that our accountability division is still talking to our state board about how we can get that added to the school dashboard, which will help create an incentive for including more instructional minutes in the classroom, and really just giving the opportunity for students to have that high quality content instruction.
And I guess to a degree is disrupting, especially at the high school, that comfort zone that sometimes I was a high school teacher that we get into, right? We have students that are graduating with an Associate of Arts 2 weeks before graduating from high school. For being such a small school, it's pretty significant. Not only that are graduating with Associate of Arts, but also they are taking dual enrollment courses. It provides that nice push from within, from the students, being able sometimes to ask these hard questions of our staff, and being okay with having, from the students' perspective, right, push out and saying, hey, why can't we get more of whatever service that they want? So is I guess being looking at yes, the adults' needs, but then also reflecting that we serve our students, and if we don't provide them with that menu of services, then shame on us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So now let's talk about teachers. So California has had a shortage of science teachers for many years, and the pandemic has exacerbated the shortage, particularly in low-income communities and also in communities of color. So how can we support science teachers? So I guess this is a two-part question. What can we do to retain current teachers? And also what can we do to attract new science teachers?
Incentives. One of the things that when I was getting my teaching credential way back when, I used to be a secondary science teacher, is there was an incentive about student school loans and reduction on your student loan payments. I've seen districts and county offices give incentives to physical science teachers who come, people from a second career coming in and being a physical science teacher and getting pay bonuses. I think that recruitment can really be improved upon, and the way that we recruit, especially for getting teachers to come in from after as a second career, could really be something that we could explore more.
I will say one of the things that we know is critical and is the first few years of teaching, that's often called induction, that period from the pre-service experience into induction turns out to be critical for helping people stay in the profession. And particularly with some turnover, we did see some churn during the pandemic. It's slowing down a little bit. We're going to have new teachers moving in, and even when we're recruiting people from other professions into teaching, we need to get serious about what does good induction look like and how you sustain someone and help them feel welcome. And that's particularly the case for teachers of color, who often in those induction years aren't feeling supported, are feeling like they're given assignments that maybe aren't on par with their professionalism, or they're asked to fill roles that are more disciplinary. So we need to really get serious about what good induction looks like. And I would say I would love to figure out how to do a media campaign elevating the status of teachers and recognizing teachers as true professionals. I'm really concerned about the erosion as sort of the way teachers have been viewed over the pandemic, and they've been heroes. And I'd love to figure out a way we can collectively be elevating the professionals that they are.
And I guess the only thing that I would add is, especially for science, is that they have the resource and materials ahead of time, right? Because sometimes they're always trying to catch up And if the administration at the site is not supportive and is not visionary with them, then there's a disconnect of what is happening at the leadership level at the site, and then also the needs of the classroom. So having the resources, having the materials, and then looking at where we're at today with we're in the 21st century, right? And we fall behind in a lot of technology devices that can be enhanced in the class, in the science classroom. So what are the things that will attract a teacher to be able to design a classroom that meets today's expectations for those students that are going to be living already in this world, in this generation? And I think that partnership and visionary outset really enhances the transformation of the school, and at the same time, the ownership. How do you mention the climate, right? The culture. It really comes from the unification of the administration, the staff of the schools to be able to create it. Money is good, but I think sometimes the money only can go so far if you're not getting your social emotional needs met.
So before we get to the next question, just a quick reminder to our audience. So we are going to begin audience Q&A in just a few minutes. If you have any questions to the panelists, please send them to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. Again, it is ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. So next question. So California, compared to the rest of the nation, California schools are closed for more months than any other states in the US. And we are starting to see the impact of the prolonged school closure. As we transition from the pandemic to the endemic phase, so what can we do so we do not lose sight of science education?
We had a really awesome partnership with both of our bargaining units. So the only time that we were closed was the first 3 months. And then when we came back, as soon as we were able to bring students back, first by choice, right? We were able to bring students back, and we were able to show and build that trust with the parents, the students, that we could actually function and with this virus and be able to learn at the same time. And we haven't missed a beat in really embracing, yes, the challenges that pandemic has brought us, but at the same time knowing that, like I was sharing with you, the science, especially with the Ngss science committee, they haven't left me off the hook. They still want us to be able to continue this year to really bank on and go back and get some trainings, because they see the value and they see what it does with our students in their classrooms. We have a couple of teachers that run some after school, we call them academies, where they bring students for a couple of weeks and they do some really neat things to really engage them in, and sometimes what they don't have time during the school day. But what if we were to flip it, right? Reading, writing, and doing the content in science is just part of the work, because people write their paragraphs and do the editing, the ELA stuff that comes with that, or the ELD standards. That's a given.
Okay, so we can, anything you would like to add, Jennifer or Heidi?
I guess I would just reinforce something I said, which is, if we were to consider science as core, as ELA and math, what would that look like? And that's how we should think about moving forward, is give it the same priorities across all the parts of the system that we give to ELA and math. And I think we would then keep it front and center. And I think it deserves that, because it is understanding basic science literacy is now part of what we have to function in our society. And it opens the doors to the most, to a lot of new careers, and to some of the most lucrative careers, and to some of the most sort of productive professional pathways.
Okay, let's end today's panel discussion with a clear call to action. So in the next 30 seconds or so, Jennifer, Martin, and also Heidi, so what is the final piece of advice you'd like to give the audience?
Both forum and instructional materials group, go through the instructional materials toolkit that is either on the CSESA website or on the CDE website, and choose quality instructional materials for your staff, and then begin the professional learning from there.
Let's go back to the basics and look at just the big picture framework and see how that aligns nicely. And that rich language literacy actually provides the vehicle to be able to access the content in science beautifully.
And I'll say professional learning for teachers. Has to be paramount.
Well, thank you to the panelists for a very informative and also insightful discussion. And each of us now has some work to do to support science education. So now let's go ahead and answer some questions from our audience. So the first question, will the de-emphasizing of science in California's K-12 schools rob some students of opportunities to enter STEM careers? And what must be done to limit this damage?
Definitely. I think that there's data that shows that students that don't get good high quality science in K-12 don't pursue college majors in science and other STEM careers, and then don't go into STEM occupations. So catching students early really is the key to ensuring they go into STEM careers. And so we are doing a disservice to our students if we don't instill the love of science and understanding of science for their future career.
And I would say that as we think about recovery plans, I think this is a really good question about maybe kids who are in their secondary and high school, whether this disruption actually has limited their access, and maybe there's creative ways to give them opportunities over the summer, or look at ways they could do internships or apprenticeships, like to be creative about how we're going to fill in some of what they may have lost with engaging kinds of experiences that can help re-entry for them into science. And I will say I'm all for a very high quality engaging learning experience over tons of lower quality sort of just covered the topics approach every time. So a really sustained, really good experience for some of these kids is probably going to be a lot more bang for your buck than trying to like cover all the topics they missed in a really shallow, boring way.
And I would go back of capitalizing also on dual enrollment opportunities, especially at the high school level. If we don't have the teachers right or the resources, our community colleges can zoom in and provide these wonderful experiences at the college level, which benefits not only the high school credits, right, but also an advancement that they can make.
Thank you. So the second question is related to the first question. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately impacted BIPOC communities, both academically and financially. From your experiences so far, have there been any efforts to reframe science for students as more than a subject, but also as a pathway toward high-paying jobs, as well as economic mobility?
At the high school, we're in November, they're going to give us back a building. It used to be a woodshop building. Is being transformed to a CTE patient care. So the idea is to provide our students with that menu of possibilities. It'll have two teachers, and half of the classroom or half of the building will be a classroom. The other half will be a lab. So thinking about the multiple pathways that it would allow them to explore. Again, for small community, we want to be able to, as much as possible, bring things out to our campus, but when not possible, then tap into the dual enrollment world.
I will also say related, but the approach that the NGSS advances really is about how do you make science more meaningful for students? And that can both be toward helping them see the pathways into the higher paying jobs and economic mobility, but also the relevance to their communities. So that often you're saying, actually, science should be driven by exploring problems relevant to my community where science is at play, or a question that I have about the natural world that I see around me. And that both makes it clear science helps my community and me and my community. And then also, as kids get older, it also, there's these professions like Martine was talking about, and then giving them the opportunity to experience those professions specifically. So I think it's really a combination.
Yeah, definitely using local phenomena-based approach in the classroom can really help students see, oh, my community is impacted by science and impacted by the STEM content area, and that interest can go into high school and helping students see how STEM content areas really can impact what career choice they choose, and having teachers get that professional learning to help highlight those careers that really do require a science degree or a science background knowledge, and some of the things the students already want to do, getting them that interest can really be helpful.
And I'll just say the kind of partnerships that I think Martina's alluded to with higher ed and dual enrollment, but also with local businesses where they might be able to create opportunities for kids to experience careers, like looking for those kinds of partnerships in your communities, I think really can help kids envision themselves more concretely.
Thank you for sharing those. So next question, how do you see the role of building principals and also district offices to support science teaching?
I guess it goes back to people sitting in my place, right? we have to be able to help. And the only reason that we went with a patient care at the high school is because 7 years ago, we surveyed the students looking at possibilities of CTE programs. What do you want to be able to bring for us to bring to you? So that's in this way. The other thing that I should mention is that we also have an ag project that is going on. We have 9 acres that we're working with a farmer that will lease the 9 acres. They'll plant the trees, they'll do the heavy work, right? But then from the classroom perspective, it's a lab. The teachers are going to be able to use not only the 9 acres, but then we have another ag farm for animals and small vegetation. But the idea that they can take a step back, and part of what I said earlier about our K5s, K8s, these are places where the teachers then can take field trips to these 3 places and be able to extend that learning that is taking place in the early grades. At least that's I'm heading with that vision, right?
I think encouraging science teachers to go into administration really would be very helpful and beneficial. My first year of teaching, my assistant principal was a former science teacher, and really there could not have been a better support system in place for me than to have an administrator who had been in a science classroom and could really help me as a new teacher understand how to be a better science teacher. So doing more encouraging of getting more former science teachers into those roles in the district office and the county office, I think is a great way forward.
I mean, and I would also say figuring out how we provide some professional development opportunities for building principals to learn what good science instruction looks like, not deeply, but enough that they're going to understand how to go into a classroom and see what's happening and understand the intent behind the instruction. And I know there's lots of efforts to do those kinds of things, give tools for observations and things like that. And I think the district offices can also help with developing both those kinds of learning experience for administrators and then the expectation that the NGSS-based instruction is what we want to be seeing.
Great. So then the next question is more for Maria and I. So who and the districts responded to the survey and what was their role? So most of the respondents are district administrators with very detailed knowledge about science education in their district. And you can find more detailed information about the respondents in our report, as well as in the technical appendix. Both of them are available on our website. So the next question, how long will it take to transition from a siloed education system of ELA and math priority to a blended subject priority with quality science in the mix? And how can we provide more easily attainable resources for scientists to make the transition to teaching?
Those are 2 really different questions, I have to say. I'll go after the first one to start. So and this is from a national perspective, having worked on this for a while. I mean, the education ship is a very large ship to turn, which means it doesn't turn quickly. I'm very encouraged about pockets where there's some really innovative, interesting things going on. I'll be honest and say, I actually think there's more potential right now in the pre-K 5 band for really exploring deep, meaningful integration, just because of the structure of the day and who's teaching. And we need to give thought to how you do it in the middle and high school in a deeply meaningful way. But I am encouraged by places where I see it, people who are going after thematic approaches or, looking at connections across the different subject areas. But to say that the whole system has turned, I think it's a decade at least, if not more, if we really want it genuinely across the whole thing. But I think there's places where exciting things are happening, and we can use those as models for how you can at least do it in pieces.
I think to piggyback on that, there are not very many high quality examples of integration in instructional materials. So I think if we see publishers starting to develop high quality integrated instruction, starting with elementary and early elementary, giving teachers an example from which to go from and a way to start developing their own curriculum, I think that would be very helpful. Again, it's far out, I think. It is a big ship to turn, and not all the rudders are moving in the same direction. So I think that instructional materials plus professional learning would really be key.
And at the local level, if I can add to both of your comments, one of the things that we started to do last year is on Fridays, this whole idea of finding greatness. And looking at great things that are happening at the school level, where the principals are actually going deep and finding for these things that are worthy being able to share out. It's a PowerPoint that we put together, and then on Fridays I'll send it to our board of trustees, and then I send it to all staff. So it creates this ongoing conversation, this synergy of why are they doing this and we're not doing this? I don't know. You might want to ask your principal, see what's going on. I think they have resources you don't. I don't know. So it really disrupts at the kindergarten level, high school level, about what they need, and it really provides that challenge from within, not coming from the district to them, but it's them themselves, right, creating this nice way of competitive approaches to what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Subtle.
Yeah. So next question, how can community-based partners or organizations help schools and districts when they don't always see the money or see the funding trickle down?
I'll go back to the comment of Heidi said these partnerships that we create. We have phenomenal partnership with our local college, with West Coast College, and then with our farm, both parts of the farm. We have these farmers that, from irrigation, drip systems, to the technology that's going to go also into it, to even some of the security cameras they want to put in place to help the students understand that, in this case, in agribusiness, right, it's not just about doing the labor. There's a lot of things, watering cycles that you have to think about, but it's through that lens that these partnerships and these ranchers, farmers, companies that are here locally, that they're able to hire then our students, and that's the idea, because they're developing these skills early on, and they can go on to these internships in their companies. And if it's a great fit, right, then they get hired, and then they get trained to be part of the company.
Mm-hmm.
But the partnerships are key.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just on the funding side, I mean, I would look to, can you think about writing a joint proposal to local foundations that, go in with the school together to do something? Or there's just been new legislation passed at the federal level where STEM ecosystems are actually getting a ton of attention. I expect that to turn into some funding opportunities. So you do have to get creative about funding. It really is true that it's not, you can't find it everywhere, but Some local foundations can sometimes be helpful. Businesses that want to invest and be seen as investing in STEM education. And then I think there's going to be some federal monies coming down the pike.
Mhm.
And there also is always the opportunity to do an MOU with the local school and between the partner and having them come out and do extended learning opportunities for students and things like that on campus. So there's always partnering with a specific school site that you might want to consider.
Mhm. Thank you. Looks like we have reached the end of our program for today. Once again, I'd like to thank Maria for her presentation and also our panelists for joining us today. And thanks again to the National Science Foundation for supporting this research, as well as today's event. And thanks to all of you for joining us today online. If you pre-registered for this event, later today, you will receive a short survey. Please take a couple of minutes to respond and let us know how we did. Thank you again. Please be safe and have a great afternoon.